Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a truly mind-bending text, Zoroaster, How to Fight the Dark God of the Universe. Specifically, we're diving deep into a fascinating lecture recorded back on January 13, 2021. It asks a pretty wild question. What if modern geopolitical conflicts aren't just about borders or economics, but are actually reflections of an ancient cosmic battle between light and darkness? Well, let's get right into it. Okay, here is our roadmap for today. We'll be looking at 1. The trap of totalitarianism, 2. Hitler and Stalin, 3. Churchill's decision, and 4. Breaking the propaganda.
We're zeroing in exclusively on Chapter 7, which is titled How to Decide the Battle of Light and Darkness. Now, forget standard political science for a second, because what the author does here is highly unusual and honestly, incredibly captivating. This chapter forces us to look at 20th century geopolitics, events we usually view strictly through the lens of economics or territory, through a very specific cosmic and dualistic lens. It completely shifts the paradigm of how we understand global conflict.
Section 1. The Trap of Totalitarianism. To start us off, the author presents a really provocative thesis about the true nature of extreme political control. The text essentially argues that extreme political spectrums eventually merge into the exact same dark desire for total domination. Think of it like a political horseshoe, right? When you look at the absolute extremes, whether that's the far right or the far left, the underlying mechanics of totalitarianism become practically identical. The defining characteristic isn't the specific economic policy or the social rhetoric. Instead, it just boils down to the dictator's overwhelming, insatiable desire to control every single aspect of human life and completely erase individual will.
And this brilliantly illustrates the author's concept of the invisible army. See, when a totalitarian regime takes hold, it systematically strips the populace of independent thought. People literally stop being neighbors with unique values, distinct personalities, and individual morals. Instead, they morph into this terrifying uniform mass. The text describes this as a faceless, invisible army. It's a society transformed into a singular weapon, ready to follow absolutely any command without a single shred of moral hesitation.
But here's where it gets wild. According to the text, there is a sinister cosmic mechanic at play behind this transformation. It suggests that as a dictator's desire for absolute control grows, that massive ego acts like a powerful beacon. Unseen, dark cosmic forces enter our sphere to help them build this faceless, obedient army using mass propaganda and fear. So the dictator provides the earthly ambition, and these unseen forces step in to provide the psychological mechanics necessary to totally brainwash the masses.
Section 2. Hitler and Stalin.
Now, the author doesn't just lump all dictators together into one bucket. Instead, he frames the distinct influences behind these two historical figures quite differently. The text categorizes the unseen dark space beings backing Adolf Hitler as being highly tech-focused. They brought a cold, calculated, clinical, and almost robotic obsession with genetic supremacy and scientific warfare. But in stark contrast, Joseph Stalin's influences are described as being rooted in an overwhelming tidal wave of brute force, raw, chaotic energy, and sheer physical numerical expansion. The text actually goes a step further here, explicitly categorizing these dictators by their distinct extraterrestrial and occult backing. The author notes that while both represent immense forces of darkness, they were operating on completely different frequencies. One was driven by an icy obsession with materialistic perfection and technological superiority, while the other relied on crushing numerical suppression. Understanding these distinct tactics, the scientific approach versus the brute force approach, is absolutely key to grasping the author's entire framework for how these dark forces manipulate humanity on such massive scales.
Section 3. Churchill's decision.
So, if these dictators represent the ultimate forces of darkness in this cosmic battle, how does the text analyze the counterforce? Well, a crucial point is this powerful juxtaposition the author makes between the principle of politics and the principle of journalism. Think about the pure ideals of journalism for a second. It operates on absolute transparency, the quest for complete truth, and pure, unfiltered justice. Now contrast that with the grim, gritty reality of politics during an existential fight for survival. Politics requires a harsh, pragmatic calculus. When you're facing total annihilation, idealism often has to take a back seat to sheer national interest and pragmatic survival tactics.
Imagine holding the ultimate secret. You have successfully cracked the enemy's unbreakable code. Winston Churchill had exactly this with the Enigma machine during World War II. But to protect that incredible advantage, he had to make agonizing, purely pragmatic choices. Sometimes this meant allowing devastating attacks to happen without warning the targets. Why? Because if he reacted, the enemy would instantly know the code was broken and that strategic advantage would be lost forever. This is the text's ultimate example of the harsh principle of politics. To defeat a dark, invisible army, the forces of light sometimes just have to make incredibly heavy, painful sacrifices that pure, untainted idealism simply wouldn't allow.
Which brings up a profound question for our modern era. If the mechanics of totalitarianism rely on unseen forces, mass brainwashing, and the creation of an invisible army of blind followers, how on earth are individuals supposed to resist this today?
And that leads us right into Section 4, breaking the propaganda.
According to the text, we can really distill the playbook of these dark forces down into 5 core tactics, and we have to understand them if we want to fight them. First, they exploit our basest, most primal desires for absolute control over others. Second, they demand blind obedience to create that invisible army we talked about. Third, they relentlessly push materialism and technological advancement at the total expense of human spiritual growth. Fourth, they manipulate political structures from the inside to ensure total domination. And fifth, they launch physical attacks through constant wars and the blatant theft of resources to enforce their will.
The author argues that recognizing this cosmic playbook is the vital first step to breaking the propaganda. The text points out that there are materialistic gods. These are forces that manipulate humanity merely through the promise of physical security, things like food, wealth, and military strength. By relying on these things, people are essentially enslaved by their own earthly needs. So the text strongly urges a fundamental shift away from this materialistic manipulation, advocating instead for a profound, independent spiritual awareness to elevate ourselves way above the trap.
Ultimately, the author's message here is a resounding call to intellectual and spiritual arms. By understanding the mechanisms of this dualistic battle, we're challenged to look critically at our own lives and our own societies. It leaves us with a provocative and honestly almost unsettling question to evaluate today. Are you actively defending your own mind, maintaining your diverse values, and resisting totalitarian groupthink? Or, without even realizing it, are you already marching with the invisible army? Thank you for joining me for this explainer.